to our Unravelling the Care Cap with myself, Lisa Vile from Athena Care Homes, alongside the lovely Nikki Kay from Eldercare Solutions. This is quite a complicated update from the government and not quite what it promises, so I couldn't think of a better person to walk us through it than Nikki. If you've got any questions, please use the chat box function and I'll read them out at the end. So without further ado, over to you, Nikki.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So let's just check that this is going to work. Hopefully, yeah, you'll let me know, I'm sure, if you can't see that. Just from a housekeeping perspective, this is going to be recorded. It's recorded now. Lisa will have the link available later today, so don't worry about scribbling notes or worrying if you miss something. Obviously, this is huge content. I'm only going to be keeping you for maybe sort of 40-45 minutes this morning. So, of course, I'm squeezing an awful lot in, which means I will be talking at quite a rate. But if you've got that recording, you can just go back over things, and if there's anything that I don't cover today, obviously this is a generic presentation and everybody watching has got a very specific set of circumstances, so if I don't quite address your particular situation, then there'll be contact details available at the end. So the plan for this morning, just as a very sort of brief outline agenda, is to look at, yes, the changes that Boris has announced in September as best we can, but just to clarify what the current situation is, just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with that. Just regarding questions, I can't see anything that's put in the chat box or the Q&A until I get to the end of this, so hopefully just bear with. We will have a look during the presentation just at some urban myths around the property and whether a property has to be sold to pay for care. And then we will, if we are perhaps disillusioned by the Boris proposals and we conclude that they're not quite what they seem, we can have a look at what action individuals can take to protect themselves really, and to try and cap costs personally. So that's the sort of the brief agenda. And when I talk about some of the proposed changes, obviously we do have to wait and see the white paper and the detail, but I'm not making my observations up out of thin air. I was actually watching what happened in 2014 when a previous care cap was introduced and announced. So I'm basing most of what I say today on the changes that were proposed before and translating that into what Boris has told us so far. Just before I start rattling through the agenda points, let me just introduce ourselves in a bit more detail, just so you know who we are. Eldercare, we're a firm of solar accredited IFAs, independent financial advisors, but if you're familiar with IFAs, you will probably think of them more as people to get mortgage advice, pensions advice, investments, protection, that sort of thing. We used to do that. I'm qualified to give all of that advice personally, but about 20 years ago decided to specialise exclusively in care funding solutions. Predominantly because as a family we didn't get this type of advice when my grandparents moved into care. So it's not really, I'm not blaming anyone for that, but we just really didn't know what we didn't know, if that makes sense. So we didn't ask the right questions and we didn't go and seek advice. I found out later on that there were lots of things that would have been helpful to know, and that's why I got on my soapbox back in 2007 setting up Eldercare, and I haven't got off the soapbox since. Whilst we're here at Lisa's kind invitation this morning, we don't have any commercial links with any care providers, but we do work with many. It's genuinely a case of just getting the right information to the right people at the time they need it. We are having money conversations with families, so we are appropriately regulated, and you will find us listed on the Financial Conduct Authority register. And I'm speaking to you this morning, not too far away, I wouldn't think, in Hertfordshire, but actually even pre-pandemic times, we deliver our advice predominantly by phone, email, WhatsApp, and of course more latterly Zoom. And that's really just because, in our experience, the family involved in these sorts of decisions don't all live in the same place. Siblings are scattered around the country, sometimes even the globe. And what we really wanted to do was make sure that there was no misinformation, nothing lost in translation. So doing it this way, having perhaps everybody on a group call or reading the same written report, there can't be those sorts of errors when something as important as this is being discussed. Now, this is my business model. It's our choice that we will share our experience. I've personally got 20 years experience giving this type of advice. We're happy to share that free of charge. We're happy to have consultations over the phone or by email with families and not charge you an hourly rate, etc. for that. We can even research a financial solution for the family at no cost. There will be a point at which we'd get paid. Obviously, we're not completely a charity, but about 90% of what we do is pro bono. So if you want to chat, you want to look at the website, read our guide, all of that's free of charge. So jumping back really to those agenda points, before we look at what's about to change, let's make sure we properly understand what the system is currently. In the UK, there are 3 possible ways your care in a care home can be paid for. It could be paid for by the local authority, social services, the council, it's all one and the same place. Completely separate but parallel, your care could be funded by our much loved National Health Service. But if you don't fall into either of those funding streams, that's what classifies you as a self-funder or a private fee payer. So breaking that down, how does the local authority funding work? The thing that's supposed to happen first and foremost when it's suspected that somebody needs care is a care needs assessment should be carried out by a social worker, by someone from adult social care. And that really is around designing a care plan, drawing up a care plan, looking at what those person's needs are. It's only when the care needs assessment has been done that any questions about the money should take place. So the means test, the financial assessment, should take place secondary. If somebody doesn't meet the council's care needs eligibility criteria, so in essence the council are saying you don't need to be in a care home, you could adequately be looked after at home, perhaps with a couple of hours of care package, then regardless of what the financial assessment flushes out, they won't be paying. That's the bottom line. So you need to meet their eligibility criteria first, then the means test is carried out. And in really, really simplistic terms, apologies if you know this already, I'm addressing people at different stages in the journey, no doubt. In this country, in England and in Northern Ireland, they're looking really to see whether your capital, your assets, are above or below £23,250. People think it's more generous in Scotland. It's slightly more generous, but only about 3,000 or 4,000 more generous. The capital limit is actually most generous in Wales. So in Wales, it's £50,000, and these are limits per person. So if we are talking about a couple, you can double those figures. Now, before I look at what counts as capital, this is one of the most, I think, important changes that Boris announced in September, and this seems to have got overshadowed somewhat by the talk of the cap, which we'll come on to. In October 2023, that 23,250 threshold is increasing by nearly fourfold and increasing up to £100,000. So for a couple, 200,000. Now, again, I'm going to break down and explain that this situation about income having to be contributed when you're state funded. But anybody familiar with the current system will know that even when your capital reaches 23,250, there's something called tariff income, where you still have to pay a little bit from those savings. Now, this is where we will need to wait and see exactly what the white paper says, but the shortened announcement, if you like, that Boris made in September said that even when your savings reach 100,000, you would have to contribute 20% of the assets between 20 and 100,000. which to me sounds very much like tariff income, but by a different name and a slightly different formula. But if you haven't got your calculator to hand, 20% of the assets between those two figures, that's 16,000 a year that you would still have to contribute from your savings, even though they're saying that you'll get state funding when your savings are at 100,000. So 100,000, you still have to contribute 16. You can see that's going to erode still fairly quickly. So don't get me wrong, it's better than the current arrangement, but it's not quite as fabulous as that might sound. So that was one of the first changes that was announced. So as I say, what counts as capital? Well, currently, and there's no talk of any of this changing, it is pretty much everything that will count. If it's a couple scenario, then it's only the person going into care that is assessed. So the capital owned by the one staying at home is not assessed. 50% of anything jointly owned is. This is where it's sensible for joint accounts to be separated out. There's a very good Age UK booklet that explains the rationale for this. You shouldn't mess with the percentages, but if you have £100,000 in a joint account, one moves into care, the one staying at home should move their 50,000 into a sole account. We can go into, as I say, a bit more detail individually around that if it's a couple scenario. There are a few other things to be aware of. The other main exception, and it worries me that social workers sometimes are saying things to the contrary, but your property is a mandatory disregard if your life partner lives there or a relative over 60 lives there. Not negotiable. There are some discretionary disregards. So if it were a 59-year-old relative, for example, or somebody who's lived there as a carer, then the property might be ignored, if not permanently, for a short period of time. So that is a main one. Nobody should be accepting loans, for example, secured against the property if a spouse lives there, because the property should be treated as being invisible in that scenario. So again, any interesting scenarios that you're facing around assessment of a property, we can give you more specific advice about that afterwards. And the only other real notable exception when the council does this assessment is if you have an investment bond that includes life cover, a particular type of investment bond, which again we can spot quite easily if you share paperwork with us. Those bonds are disregarded. Now, if you've just purchased one as you were moving into care because you heard that they were a disregarded asset, that won't work. But if you've got money held in there as a long-term arrangement, that don't rush to cash it in. You can cash it in, but it would be excluded in the means test. So otherwise, pretty much everything counts as capital. Second properties, business assets, cash under the bed, all of that would be assessed. And this is what I alluded to in an earlier slide. Income is included in this assessment. So when the local authority assess somebody's needs and they agree to pay for those needs, they will still expect the individual to pay their income towards what the council is paying. It's called an assessed contribution. So when we're talking about a couple, the partner staying at home can keep 50% of a private pension, but pretty much everything else that the individual has goes towards what the local authorities say they'll pay. So many people think that the council will pay 500, 600 a week, and then they can top up with their pension. That's not the case. It's a combined contribution. If the council say we're paying 600, and you've got a £200 pension, they'll only be paying 400. So really important to know that. They will, as I've picked a figure out of the air when I say 500 or 600, but they do have a limit to what they'll pay for somebody's care. Now, if your local authority funded from day dot, then there should always be a care home place on offer that meets your needs and that the local authority pay for in full, with your contribution, of course. There should always be a no top-up option. However, there are two situations where a third-party top-up can be requested. The first one is the scenario I've just outlined, where you're funded by the state from the beginning. They find a place that meets your needs that they're paying for, but you don't like it, or the family doesn't like it and want you to move somewhere else, if that somewhere else is a bit more expensive, they can ask for a third party top up. Or if you start off as a self-funder who then runs out of money, depending when that happens and what the care home says in their contract about that happening, if the local authority won't cover that care home's fees in full when they take over, a third party top up could be requested by the home. So they're the only real sort of two occasions where a third party top up would be required. So I hope that makes sense. I rushed through that quite quickly. So that's our means tested system, and that doesn't look like that's changing, but for the amount, the capital limit going all the way up from 23,250 to 100,000, but everything else pretty much sounds like it's staying the same. The biggest change that's been mentioned by Boris, and as I said in my introduction, we were here in 2014, there was legislation that introduced a care cap that should have come into being in 2020. But in July, I think, of 2015, they pulled on it. They did a complete U-turn. So we aren't in October 2023 yet. So a lot could happen between now and then. Another U-turn could happen. But what's been proposed at present is said to be based on the legislation that was introduced in 2014. So it's going to be quite similar to what should have happened but didn't. What we know so far, as I say, it's completely separate to the means tested system that I've just outlined, and that remains. This will run in parallel. It will not be retrospective. So somebody starting to pay for care now or in 2022, anything they spend between now and October 2023 won't count. It won't count towards the cap. The cap, where previously, for anybody that, I don't know why you would if you weren't involved in a care scenario at the time, but the previous cap was £72,000 that was proposed. So I guess they've just taken that and inflation proofed it forward. So 86,000 is the cap. And the first of the buts, the big buts, is that it will only be personal care costs that count. So what that means is that hotel costs, accommodation costs, the food element, etc., none of that counts towards the cap, just the actual care costs. And that will be at a rate set by the local authority, not what the person is actually paying. So theoretically, the local authority still has to assess somebody's needs. They accept that they're a self-funder, but they say, well, if we were paying for you, this is what we would be paying. And that, therefore, is what will count towards the cap, not what you're actually paying as a self-funder because you've chosen this lovely home. So that is going to be a significant difference, I would suggest. Now, with the hotel and accommodation costs, it's not likely to be the case that the care home will have to provide a breakdown. That's certainly not what had to happen before. The government will just set an amount, a nominal amount that they say is appropriate for hotel and accommodation costs. And last time they did it UK wide, there was no regional variance. And what they said was, of the rate that we would pay for you, 230 a week of that is what we're going to deem as hotel and accommodation costs. So that won't count. So let me give you an actual monetary example. We're in October 2023. Theoretically, an assessment has been done to say that you need to be in care, and unless that happens, you're not going to get a care account. You open up a care account, presumably someone's going to monitor that on a computer. You've chosen a care home costing £1,300 a week. But the local authorities say, well, but if we were paying, we would only pay £600 a week. So only the 600 will count. And then, of course, they're going to deduct those hotel costs that they've stated don't count either. So it's £370 a week only that would be clocking up on your computer care account, whatever we want to call that, even though you are paying £1,300 a week. So again, if you haven't got a calculator to hand, I've done the math. If we divide 370 into that cap of 86,000, that takes 232 weeks, 4.5 years, to reach and ring the bell and say, right, I've reached the cap. That's not really how it's been portrayed, is it? One might reasonably think, or if I'm in a care home costing 1,000 a week, it'll take me 86 weeks to get to the cap. Very, very far from that. Okay, so there will be variables to this example, but the only meaningful variable will be if the local authorities nominated amount that they say they would pay for somebody is much higher than 600. So the higher above 600, the quicker it will be to reach the cap. But I just can't see, because those are the sorts of rates that they pay for people, that they are going to assume a much higher figure than that. So the total spend in this care home at 1,300 a week, not allowing for fee increases, would actually have been over that period just over 300,000. So they say this will cap catastrophic care costs. Personally, I don't see it. It'll take the edge off it for those that are in care for many years, because even if you reach the cap, you are still going to have to pay those nominated hotel costs and any difference between what the council rate is and your actual rate. So in other words, you'd get a contribution in this example of 370 a week towards your care. Very welcome, I'm sure, on top of the attendance allowance and so on, but it's not quite how people have understood it to be, I believe. Most people, or many people, well before they reach the cap, might have crossed over into the means tested system because their capital has dropped to 100,000. So this won't even really be relevant. I assume the care cap calculator account just gets switched off at that point because you're getting state funded through the means tested system. So don't shoot the messenger. I stand to be corrected when the white paper comes out, but this is how the Deal Not proposals and the Care Act 2014 laid it all down. So there's no reason at the moment to think it's going to be drastically different. And it may yet be U-turned. The reason it was U-turned before was because to get a care cap account, unless they do some sort of light touch assessment where they just get the care home to confirm somebody's there and needs to be there. What happened before was that social workers had to assess all self-funders as well as all the people that they are currently assessing. So their workload was going to treble overnight, and they just didn't have the infrastructure to do that. Not sure that's going to be any different by the time we get to October 2023. So that's what we know so far. We will update it as we know more. But hopefully that's unravelled a few of the myths around the care cap. So just going back to the other funding stream, which again we currently have, and we don't imagine this is going to change. This is a whole webinar in itself, and I'm not the expert. I can put you in touch with the experts. You may be aware of it already, but we've talked today so far just about social care needs, personal care needs. If you saw the Ed Balls documentary last night, you'll have a much better understanding of what personal care needs are. That's all the means tested system. If your primary need is a healthcare one, where you do need a nurse or a team of medically qualified people to be integral in your day-to-day care package, so having needs that are complex, unstable, unpredictable, that would normally perhaps be looked after and cared for in a hospital setting, that's when the NHS will pay for you. And they'll either pay a weekly contribution or they'll pay everything. And that's NHS Continuing Health Care that you may have heard of. As I say, I can't go into any more detail on this one today. Suffice to say, if you need to be put in touch with people to assess the reality or likely chance of you getting it, but it's not means tested. So it could be somebody starts off on the private self-funding stream and may cross over into the NHS funding stream later because their care needs increase or their health deteriorates. So put succinctly, if you're not eligible for state funding because you have too much money, you're not eligible for NHS funding because you're not poorly enough, that's what puts you into the self-funding category. Currently the 23,250, but as we say, increasing in a couple of years' time. That's about the only positive I have for you this morning, is to say that as a self-funder, if you didn't know about it, you can claim attendance allowance. That's paid at 2 rates according to whether you're needing day and night care or just day care. This still carries on if you're in a care home, if you're self-funding. Okay, so again, some people think they have to notify the DWP and it will stop. It won't stop if you're self-funding. The only other real help available currently for self-funders, aside from the attendance allowance and the nursing care contribution if you're needing nursing care, is if you have a property and not a lot else. So apologies again if this doesn't affect you, but it probably does represent the majority of the people we talk to, where the wealth is in the bricks and mortar, the cash at bank might be limited. So if this is a scenario where one person is moving into care, leaving the property vacant, and their other funds are under the capital limit, then there's some help available for the first 12 weeks of moving into care on a permanent basis. So the local authority has to disregard the existence and the value of the property, meaning that all they can assess is your limited savings. So you would get state funding for 12 weeks. So that has a limitation. The council will only pay what they'll pay. You won't necessarily get the full cost of care covered. You still have to contribute your income. But what's really important here is you can choose still to go into wherever you want to end up being long term. You don't have to go into a council funded care home, a home that's on their list, as they would say, because although they're paying for it, they're only paying for the 12 weeks. And after that, you're reverting to self-funding. So there is some misinformation coming out of social services about this. If you're not sure that you or your relative's been correctly assessed, we can help clarify. Now, we said, do you have to sell a property to pay for care? The 12 weeks was designed to sort of give a bit of thinking time. You could arguably not sell the property, maybe rent it out if it's in a place, an area near a good school, it's in good condition. If you rent it out, then at least there may be an increase in the property value. You're certainly not going to get a very high interest rate putting the money in the bank. But if you might think, yeah, we could do that. We accept the hassle factor of being a landlord and void periods and so on. You have to pay tax on the income and so on. However, we've still got a shortfall, so that's not going to work. The rent plus the pensions plus the attendance allowance, it still leaves us short. So we have no choice but to sell. Well, this is where the local authority can help. They can lend money, something called a deferred payment agreement, a deferred loan. I suppose it is really a government equity release scheme, for want of a better description. But what they're saying is you don't have to sell, we'll lend you what you need, and you just pay us back when the person in care has died. So it's a deferral. But if you're getting some rental income, it's reducing the shortfall. And if the property goes up in value, that's helpful. So you can use it for the short term, just for a few months until the property's sold, or you can use it longer term and rent out. All local authorities have to offer the scheme, but they do have some variable rules. I found out from a client just last week that Redbridge, for example, insist on there being at least 3 years worth of loan available within the value of the property. So that could be restrictive for some. They will charge interest and setting up fees, but you're only paying interest on the bit you're borrowing, not on the whole value of the house, of course. Setting up fees as you would expect. You still need to meet their eligibility criteria. So if they don't think you need to be in care, they're not going to offer the loan. Your other assets need to be under the capital limit. But unlike with the 12-week disregard, where they're only going to pay their maximum, with the loan, they can lend you what you need. So if you are in a 1,300 a week care home and you've only got 400 a week of income, they can lend you the 900 a week. As I say, has to be repaid on death, but can be repaid sooner. So it follows on from the 12-week disregard. That doesn't have to be paid back, this does. So again, if you need advice just generically or a sounding board, would this be a good idea or are we better off selling? We can help give you an independent view on that. So you're all still hopefully with me. This is why we do this in the morning and not the afternoon, because it's a lot. of content. So just really honing in on our self-funders. That's the broader category, so where the house may have already been sold or there are other assets, etc. Usually self-funding families have two main concerns. If they're at the choosing a care home stage, then it's, well, how do we know if we can afford this? We might be able to afford 1,500 or 1,000 a week for the short term, but we don't have a crystal ball. We have no idea how long our loved one is going to be in care. So how on earth do we work out if we can afford it? Okay, you'll often hear an average statistic banded around people being in care on average for 2 years. It is an average, and that includes people who are state funded and go in far later than perhaps they should. That includes very poorly people with nursing care needs, as well as, of course, people with perhaps physically not doing too badly at all, but with a dementia diagnosis, who may be expected to live well in care for many years. So it does make that really difficult if you don't know which category your relative is in, how you can budget. And if you don't know how long they're in care, it leads to the other concern, which is what happens if the money runs out. So of course there are other concerns, but financially they're the two main ones that are shared with us. Now, if people have those concerns, there is a solution that may address them. With the best will in the world, if we're talking to a family and we're doing some cash flow forecasting, you know, what sometimes people forget when they're working out what they can afford is that the care home fee typically is all inclusive or very little else to go on top of that. And yet their pension and their attendance allowance, well, they don't really need that anymore because the fee is pretty much all inclusive. So that straight away can be used to put towards the fees and might reduce it from 1,500 to 1,000. So just in terms of cash flow forecasting, that's a really simple and basic thing we'll talk families through. If, however, the shortfall we're left with, if we divide that into the savings and the assets, there's only enough for a year or two, then with the best will in the world, there's no solutions that we can put in place or recommend that will take away those concerns. That money could still run out if the individual is in care for a year or two. So in that scenario, it's about having an open, frank conversation with the care home about what their attitude would be in that scenario. Would they accept local authority funding in a year or two if that person's money runs out? Is it realistic that the person would still be with them in a year or two? So that's a private conversation to have. But if the funds, on the other hand, might last for upwards of 3 years onwards, there is a solution that could prevent those concerns about money running out and giving people sleepless nights. But it's a solution that 85% of self-funders never get to hear about. And going back to my introduction, that was us. So as a family, we were self-funding. My grandparents, we never got to hear about this. So please don't think this next sort of 5 minutes is me sort of product bashing as such. It either works for the family or it doesn't. My influence doesn't come into things. My job is just to explain the facts around it and really empower you to make an informed decision. But if you don't know about it, you can't out of that 85% and make sure that you're aware of this solution. You can investigate it or not as you see fit thereafter. So what am I talking about? Well, fundamentally, insurance. So it is possible to insure care home fees. Now, with insurance, normally we have to do that in advance, don't we? So if we're going to insure our car or our house, we have to have not had the car accident yet and not had the water leak yet. But with care home costs, you actually can't insure in advance anymore. There aren't any pre-funded policies. You can only insure at the time that care is needed. So as you're moving into care or shortly after you've moved into care, you can buy insurance. Now, the Google search engine term is a care fees annuity, but the word annuity, typically people think of that as poor value. Well, why? Well, because they're familiar with retirement annuities, pensions. And of course, pensions are a slightly different animal because they're designed to be purchased when somebody's probably in their 60s. They're expected to pay out for 20, 30 years. They're expected to go up with inflation and pay a widow's pension, etc. So it's a big ask of a pot of money. So when people think that they're swapping their £500,000 pension fund and they're only getting a 20,000 income, that looks poor value, that's why. But if you take the concept with a care home scenario where we have an annual bill to pay, we've got some income, but we've got a gap, and we don't know how long we need it guaranteed for life, the concept of this might work. The concept of swapping a lump sum up front, paying a one-off payment to an insurance company, but getting a guaranteed tax-free income for however long the care is needed. Estate would that use up, etc., etc. Those are the variables, but as a concept it might be worth looking into. Now, unlike pension annuities where you sort of get a rate table and you just look up somebody's age and how much they will get, age does play a part, but every single one of these, and this is our job at Eldercare, we're the sort of intermediary, we facilitate all of this for you, is we get the quotes individually underwritten. So a GP report will be looked at, and if somebody's already moved into care or they're having a carer at home, the care provider will also be contacted and asked questions about the person's day-to-day care needs. Any information the family provide, any reports, etc., all of that's taken into account in order to arrive at the cost of the annuity. So the older somebody is, the cheaper it will be. The more poorly they are, the cheaper it will be. But it figures, doesn't it, that the younger somebody is and the healthier they are, the longer they might be expected to be in care. So, of course, the insurance companies might charge more. So our job is to assess with the family what's the shortfall, how much income is needed, and then just get quotes for that amount. We get a range of quotes so that you can see the effect of, for example, including an annual increase to keep up with fees that might increase every year. These policies are fundamentally a gamble. They're a gamble on somebody's life expectancy. Sometimes the insurance company wins, sometimes the person's estate wins. More often than not, it's a kind of break-even point. So it's very much for families to individually decide where peace of mind sits for them. Does the peace of mind come from having the insurance and knowing the rest of the money is secure, or does the peace of mind come from not having to risk money that they could lose to an insurance company and just pay as they go instead? So really, really a very personal choice. The policies are fully portable, so if you do move homes, they go with you, and as I say, you can index link them. I've mentioned this gamble, and they are a gamble. They all come with a 6-month money back guarantee. So if the person were to die very soon after buying the policy, money's returned to the estate on a sliding scale. But we also get you a range of quotes to include extra capital protection, which is, as it says, to return more money to the estate in the event of early death. Or you can buy these policies, a much overlooked option, on a deferred basis, where you still buy them today, but they don't start paying out tomorrow. They start paying out in a year or in 2 years. And the beauty of that is that you've still got the peace of mind, you've still got the longevity covered, but because they don't start paying out straight away, they're cheaper to buy. The insurance company's not going to charge you as much. And if they're cheaper to buy and the person dies early, you don't lose as much money because you've given the insurance company less money to start with. So achieves the same, costs broadly the same in the long run, but you're just not parting with as much money up front. So that's a really, really, to me, the no-brainer option if it's available from the cheapest insurer. They don't all do it. Very good question would be if I parted with the money and gave this big lump sum to the insurance company, and I accept that they're then taking on the responsibility, but what happens if they go bust? These products are covered by the Financial Service Compensation Scheme. This is the scheme that covers you at bank. At bank, you're limited to £85,000 protection. Here, there's no limit. So if you've bought a £40,000 a year income, a £40,000 a year income is what's protected by the scheme. So really, really secure. So people do these plans, take these plans out for two reasons: to either ring fence the remaining assets. Some people do this if they're very wealthy, to mitigate inheritance tax. So anything that you spend on one of these policies reduces the estate immediately for any inheritance tax calculation. So the wealthy, it could appeal to. The sort of mid-range assets, this protects some of the money. But for others, some people would even use almost all of the assets simply to avoid the scenario of knocking on the council's door in a few years and asking them to pay, because we don't know if they will, we don't know how much they will, and whether a top-up would be required by the care home, etc. So they're the main two reasons. Now, I think we find roughly the reports that we issue, probably about 40% of people accept the recommendation. We don't get quotes for people that we know it's not going to work for. If we know it's going to be too expensive, where there's limited funds, or the family's attitude is just that they wouldn't take the risk. So we are only kind of writing reports and getting to that stage for people where we think it will fit. And for the people that we think it will fit for, as I say, the take-up rate is about 40%. The main reason that somebody might not need this anymore once they've bought the income, the odd person does move back home and doesn't need as much care, but the more likely scenario is that their health deteriorates, and at some stage they get the NHS funding that we talked about earlier. If that happens and they don't need the annuity income anymore, it just pays to them, goes into their bank account with a small tax charge. So I said right at the beginning, our business model is not like everybody else's. We understand that this is a bit of an abstract concept, that people won't really know if it's for them or it's not until they see the numbers and they get all the advice. If we start charging for that, for researching or for giving you the quotes, it puts people off. We just know that from experience. So our choice is to offer the research and the advice at our expense, not yours. And in return, we'll be paid an advice fee if a purchase is made, and that may be marginally more than somebody else. Now, I say somebody else, there are very, very few specialist IFAs in the UK that do this. There are none that do this exclusively, and very, very few that have been doing it as long as I personally have, 21 years. So you will be paying a tiny bit more, but you're getting as specialist and as expert advice around this as there is available. Just to sort of re-emphasize that, the insurance companies that offer these policies, there used to be two for many, many years. These were the two companies, but in 2018 and 2019, two more came into the market, and both of them chose my company to pilot and launch their product to the market too. So we wouldn't have been selected by those big insurance companies to do that unless we know what we're doing. So you're in good hands. We go and get the quotes from all four every time, because we simply don't know which of them will be the cheapest, and there can be a huge variance in cost between them. So almost bang on my 45 minutes. Just to finish, really, you've had the website address come up on all the slides through there, but just in case I wasn't drawn to it, Eldercare Group is the web address. Really important that you put group. If you just put Eldercare, you'll get an alarm company, which may be useful to you, but not very helpful on the finances. The 0800 number is an office hours helpline. Any one of my team, if I'm not available, can answer your questions. They've been with me a very long time. They have to listen to me talking about this all day, every day. They've picked up an awful lot of information themselves, so they're really pretty good. And if you want to contact us just in writing or outside of office hours, the advice at Eldercare Group email's the best option. Lisa's obviously got details. I've put this slide up, specifically this page, because if you are interested at all around the care annuity, on that page there is a ready reckoner. It literally just asks for the person's age, how much income you think that they need, how much the shortfall is, and it will give you a ballpark estimate of what we think the quotes will be. Now, that ballpark is based on other people of the same age for whom we've obtained quotes over the last couple of years. So it's not necessarily healthy pensioners, it's people needing care, people who are in care homes who've been through our quote system, and we've just averaged out how that looks. So there will be variance if you get an underwritten quote, but if you're really just wanting that rough idea, then that might be a good place for you just to sort of have a look around. Quite a lot of other information on there as well. Care cap updates will appear on there as we learn more, and we hopefully see a white paper in the not too distant future. It was meant to be at some point this year, so not long to go. So we'll no doubt have another one of these when we know more, and we can keep you updated. But as I say, Lisa will have the recording from today later on. Lisa, you're back visually. You're and on mic. Welcome back.
Thanks, Nikki. That was great. Really interesting, and clearly answered a lot of questions, because we only have one, which is good, because obviously you've covered everything. So CV's asked, do you have any data or stats on the average stay in a care home? Now, this came in when you were talking about the length of time the 8 to 6 hours will last. So
yeah, I mean, there's only the only kind of concrete report, and it's really old now, is a report Bupa did in 2011 that said the average of stay of their resident, I believe, was 2.25 years. But of course, they had a couple of hundred care homes, 70% state funded, a lot of nursing homes. So, you know, I don't know how much weighting you give to that. It's just such a range. I had a death notification last week of somebody that we did a policy for in 2012. They bought an annuity. It was based on a 4.5 year break even. They've died in 2021. So that policy paid out twice as much as they spent on it. They lived twice as long as the insurance company predicted, and they were already predicted to live twice the average. So you kind of just can't be sure. Yeah. So I think you have to look at your individual. Your loved one isn't an average. Take the advice from the GP, from the care home, I suppose a bit of your own gut feeling, and you can't plan on a national statistic, I don't think.
I believe the average is sitting around 18 months at the moment, but it's reduced for people in nursing care, because they tend to be more unwell. I think that's around 11 months. Yeah. And then for residential care, around sort of 20. So it's really interesting to see how this plays into this kind of care fee cap for 2023, because nobody's ever going to reach the value of it being important enough for them to worry about, right? No, I mean, you saw that. Did you see the documentary? I'm sure lots of us did, the Ed Balls thing last night, and there was a gentleman there that they've spent over £500,000 on his care already. Wow, yeah. So, you know, yes, he perhaps would have reached the cap, but his care costs were very specialist one-to-one needs, and what he then gets, he's still going to have to pay the majority of it. So, I think we've just got to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, and it's nice if you get it. I would treat it as if it's a glorified attendance allowance. And it will be for the people that are more lifestyle choice, who've gone into care, you know, and do expect to still live in care for many years. It will be those people that benefit. Yeah, what we're starting to see at Athena is the average age of the people inquiring to move into care is creeping up. So we're tending to see less people, and whether it's COVID related or not, we can't tell until we come out of this. But we're getting less people that want to come in for those kind of lifestyle choices, come in because they're lonely, they want more people around them, and more people are coming in because they're frail and because they absolutely have to. It's a last resort. I suspect at the moment it is COVID related, and that will settle back down again, but again, time will tell with that one. Yeah, I think you're right. Sally's put a question up. To purchase a care fee annuity, do you have to meet the criteria for care, i.e. the local authority assessment? No, absolutely not. You just need to be a self-funder with a care bill to pay. The insurance companies will need to see, when they do the underwriting, they would need to see either some sort of mental incapacity, or usually needing some sort of help with at least 1 or 2 activities of daily living. But the mere fact that you're in a care home with a care bill to pay is normally sufficient to be eligible. So it's not related to the local authority at all. And the important thing as well is, if somebody buys an annuity and it's been done correctly,
What do I mean by that is that we have seen a couple of cases, we would never do this, but if somebody's got a limited estate and they say, well, I'll spend some of the money on an annuity and I'll pay the rest of my shortfall from what's left, the savings that are left, that's really dangerous, because if those savings that are left run out and the annuity isn't enough to pay the shortfall, you're caught between the rock and the hard place, because you won't get council funding. You've got too much income, including your annuity, but you haven't got enough income because the annuity wasn't set up correctly to pay the full fee. So you're literally caught in that no man's land. So yeah, you've got to do the annuity and make sure it's got longevity, that it will opt you out of the local authority system forever. In effect, you'll still be eligible for the care cap account, and you'd still get anything that you were due, by the way. So if you've bought an annuity, you're in care for years and years, and you still reach the care cap, you'll still get that money that the government would pay you, as well as having your annuity income and your pension income. So you won't lose out.
It's really interesting what you say there about the criteria for annuities and needing support with 2 care activities a day.
Or one, yeah, for pre-funded. If you've got an old style pre-funded, that was your trigger for claiming.
Okay.
Either 1 or 2 ADLs, but for the immediate plans, you pretty much just need to have a care home bill to pay. And why would you have a care home bill to pay unless you needed some sort of support?
Yeah, of course. Well, that was going to be my question, was does that cover things like chronic loneliness, which is impactful on mental health?
Yeah.
Because you can have someone move into care because of that fact. They can be relatively self-sufficient but have no family around them, no near neighbours, that kind of thing, and just feel for safety and security that they'd be better placed in a care home and make that choice themselves.
Definitely. I mean, they'll be more expensive than if they, of course, have got conditions that show up on their medical records or that sort of thing. But
because of life expectancy, I guess. Okay. Okay. And then I had one other question come through. Do you foresee any other providers coming in to compete with those 4 companies that are offering annuities? I
don't think so. Simply because the market isn't big enough to warrant it at the moment. That statistic I showed you, the 85% of people, I mean, why would you come into a market where 85% of people that can buy your product, and it's only people going into care or with a care bill to pay that can buy your product, if 85% of them never get to hear about it? And unless you've got some magical way, and I've been trying for 20 years to make sure those 85% of people get to hear about it so they can rule it in or rule it out, why are you going to come into that market? You know, if it was routine that every self-funding family got told about this and it was recommended to them that they got some quotes or they went on a ready reckoner and worked out for themselves if it was affordable, then maybe we would, because the market would be so much bigger. But it's that constant lack of who's going to tell these people. Lisa, you at Athena do a great job of awareness, but most care providers go, we're not going to talk about the money. It's none of our business how somebody pays for their care. And you might do a newspaper article, but unless it affects you that day, then you're not going to read it. It's that constant, you know, how do people get to hear about this product? It's not mainstream. It's not something everybody's going to need to know about, and while it remains a bit of a mystery to people, the product providers won't come in, I don't think.
I guess one of your biggest barriers is that at the time someone is looking for care for a loved one, it's normally in the midst of a crisis when their emotions are through the roof, and what they want is somewhere safe for their loved one to be cared for and looked after. We'll deal with the money later, and of course they think maybe it's too late, or they get into a routine of they just pay their money monthly by direct debit, and
and they don't know any different. How do they know that there's an alternative? Other than tuning into events like this or picking up a leaflet. That's the problem. And those that want to plan ahead, the opposite end of the scale, that say, no, we're going to, you know, get to know care homes in the area and know what we want for mum if and when that happens. From a financial perspective, there's not a lot you can do in advance either. You can't buy one of these before time. You can't get a quote before time. So it is a very, very tricky one. But
absolutely. But we will keep banging the drum, Nikki.
We will.
Super. Well, we haven't had any more questions come through, so like I said, I think you covered that in great detail. I remember going through this with you back in 2014 when they tried this previously, but it's good to go over it again with slightly different figures and kind of understand what the proposal is. It will be interesting to see see what comes out of this. But you'll keep us up to date with any changes?
I will, as ever.
Super. Okay, lovely.
Brilliant.
Everyone, thanks for attending. We hope you took some value from it, and we will be forwarding the recording out to you so you can revisit. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Take care. Bye.